Yo, what's up, y'all? Happy New Year. From me to you, Peter Agostin in the house list. Welcome to a new year, new episodes. It's 2018. What's up, y'all? How you feeling? You guys doing good? You feeling good? I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling great. Thank you for asking. And we have a wonderful conversation to kick off this new year with the one and only Joseph Patel, a.k.a. Jazzbo. And I recorded this conversation on New Year's Eve, so in the afternoon. And, Jazzbo is a writer that I've known, a name I've known for a long, long time. And so we kind of riff. Our conversation is like riffing, but it's me, asking him about his life and his career. And for some of you that may remember his work, say at Herb magazine, which as you listen to this podcast, oftentimes I might reference that. Now, the defunct essentially, but it was a very pivotal rag that I wrote for, and many other great writers that went to do a lot of good things, a lot of published authors, professors, and so on. And Joseph Patel was part of that crew. He also was an integral piece to the establishment of Soul Sides, the imprint, which, came out of UC Davis, out of the radio station there, via Jeff Chang, DJ Shadow, Blackalicious. And, this is pre-Quantum. So we talk about the Bay a little bit, Soul Sides, and his career, because he's went on to do a lot of great things at MTV and Vice and Fader and so on. So I'm really happy and excited to share this with you. If this is your first time tuning in, hey, thank you. Check it out. You can subscribe to this great podcast called The House List, where many podcasts are found. So the Stitcher app, if you only check out stuff on Google Play, is there. iTunes, of course. Please subscribe there. And if you can't rate it and review it, I guess that means something. And then SoundCloud, of course. So shout out to all my people that listen on SoundCloud, because you guys make a tremendous impact when you repost these. And I peep it out, and I really appreciate it. So you can go to soundcloud.com/The Houseless Podcast. I'm also at Twitter at HouselessPod for any and all updates on the podcast. So what a year we just went through, eh? Man, damn. And it's freezing in New York as well. So it's New Year's Day. I'm recording this on New Year's Day, and all I'm doing today is watching Unsolved Mysteries, as I often do. Going through some tapes and some CDs. And I was gone for a couple weeks down in Virginia, unpacking and just lounging. You know what I'm saying? So, and hopefully I get some reading done as well. I'm not just going to watch Unsolved Mysteries all day. I got a couple hours in so far, though. But I do want to say a couple things about some great artists and friends of mine that we lost in this year previous. So I would be remiss to not mention some of these people, because I worked with them directly. I was friends with some of them, and also fans, especially in the hip-hop world specifically, because there's so many great musicians that we lost last year. But my friend and a big supporter of the Houseless Podcast, DJ Steph, who is and will continue to be terribly missed. Another great DJ in the Bay who just recently passed, Pam the Funktress of The Coup. And I've been working as The Coup's booking agent for several years now, too. So that was very heartbreaking. And I, in fact, remember interviewing Pam and Boots when I was making my documentary back in 1999 in a hotel room in Portland, Oregon. And what's kind of interesting is that our guest today, Joey Patel, a.k.a. Jazzbo, I interviewed probably that year, if not the next year, in New York City. And also, I just want to send a rest in peace, and I was quite heartbroken when I saw this, that Ganja K of First Brigade, Project Blowed, and just an incredible MC that never really, truly ever got its due. He passed very recently, too. tragically, and I was pretty heartbroken about that. He had an album called Harvest for the World, which I had a cassette dub of many, many years ago. In fact, probably 20 years ago at this point in time, if not more. That's absolutely incredible. It's one of my favorite albums of all time that was never really released. I know that Ganja just recently put it up on his Bandcamp page, so I would recommend peeping it out. It's not exactly the same version that I got back in the day, which was originally meant to be on Palace Records, short-lived label that also put out E-Rule and the Bushwhackers and some other stuff. So, yeah, it just sucks, man, because he didn't get his due, in my opinion. And he was an incredible writer. And, I just want to say rest in peace to him. And to, if you lost any friends or family this year, too, I extend that out to all of y'all, too. So, anyway, let's move on with this podcast. I love doing this. It's a way to document artists, and I include writers and journalists under that whole banner. To me, it's a fine art, no matter what your style is or your approach aesthetically. So, and I think the guy that I'm talking to, it absolutely qualifies for that, and he has some amazing stories. So, settle in and peep this great conversation out with Jazzbo, only here on the podcast called The House List. I'm your host, Peter Agostin. Every episode is edited and engineered by CJ Stewart. Yo, I just hope you guys have a wonderful new year. Many more episodes to come as I continue on with this joint. Tell a friend about it. Put it up on your blog if you have one, or even just post it on your Facebook page or whatever. But let's get the word out and continue with this joint called The House List Podcast. Many great episodes. Go back as well if this is your very first time, because this is our 66th episode as we start 2018 off. You know what I'm saying? All right, let's jump into this. Thank you, guys. It's funny because I wanted to, obviously you come from the Bay, so there's, but you sort of have a few different starting points, I guess, in the music industry, if you will, but even back then. And I know you, and most people know you through, music journalism stuff. Especially, there's like a kind of constituency of writers from a period of time that all kind of contributed to a range of the same magazines for the most part.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, like there's the whole like early Soul Sides thing too.
Yeah.
So I would love to at least try to track back to how you got involved with both of those things, because I know you went to Davis, right?
Yeah, UC Davis.
So does it really start there, or?
No, it actually starts in high school. So
nice, okay.
I went to high school in the Bay in Fremont, California, and I was sort of, prior to that, I was into music the way any kid was into music. And I remember I was notorious. My parents used to scream at me all the time. Like, even when I was I think I was 8 or 9 years old, I was the guy that would, the RCA record club or cassette club. I would I was like eight tapes for a penny, like not knowing that you had to then buy one every month, right?
Right.
And so I would, like, a box would show up with like 8 cassettes and like Van Halen and Run DMC and all this stuff, and my mom would be like, "What? Why did you sign up for this? Like, this isn't free." And I was like, "But it says it's for a penny." And when I got to high school, I became super music obsessed because I found a couple of friends, one friend in particular, who was more into music than I was, and so he was sort of like my guiding light into a bunch of shit I had never heard before.
Oh, nice.
So high school was really when I became obsessed with music.
What was his name?
Noel Tolentino.
All right.
And he lives here. Actually, he lives in Fort Greene. We both ended up in New York. And so he would get me into things. He'd make me tapes of stuff I'd never heard before, and then I would take that and just start running. Right, like he introduced me to the Cocteau Twins.
Oh, cool!
And then I became obsessed with 4AD, and I would dig into 4AD stuff, and then I would find the thing that I liked from 4AD, which is a little different from what he liked. And so one of my first obsessions was Wolfgang Press.
Oh, interesting.
Right? I really love that band. Still love that band. And then Pixies. I remember I had turned him onto the Pixies because I had seen their record, the Surfer Rosa, Come On Pilgrim, and I was like, oh my God, you got to hear this. It's so different from everything else on 480. So he was a real guiding light for me, and I think much to my parents' dismay. Like, he got me into music, and music was really then became the gateway into how I got into, like, how I started to see the world and how I got into everything else.
Right.
You read the liner notes and you look at the photography and the design, and you start to learn about design, photography, literature, and, you know, a Cure song after a Camus novel, and then you find out who Camus is, and that so music was sort of the lens in which I looked at everything, but also like the gateway drug to getting into everything else.
Yeah.
And then Noel was a part of this like little skate crew in Fremont that another guy in that crew started making a zine called Gus.
Oh, okay. Gus, I'm not familiar with
it.
It
was like a skate zine, you know, really local Fremont thing, and then when Noel got to Santa Cruz, he made a well, no, in high school. So for Gus, I think. So at some point, senior year of high school, Noel started a zine called Bunny Hop.
Okay.
I think it was Bunny Hop, or I think it was called Waffle. Actually, the first zine he started was one
nice.
called Waffle. And so for his zine, we were trying to interview the Red Hot Chili Peppers because we were really into the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and we ended up calling the management company to ask for an interview, and we hustled the receptionist into patching us in with Chad Smith on the phone. And he had just joined the band, and they
So this is like their first or second album, maybe, or
no, this is like because
before
this is like their Mother's Milk.
Yeah.
Right? So this was like, I think that was their fourth album.
Yeah.
But it was their first one with the new band, right? With Frusciante and Chad Smith. And I remember she put us on the phone with Chad Smith, and suddenly I'm interviewing Chad Smith. And I write it up.
This is high school.
This is high school, senior of high school. So I write it up and we put it out in the zine, and I was just like, oh, this is incredible. And then the Red Hot Chili Peppers came to town. We went to soundcheck. They let us into soundcheck.
Wow.
We ended up meeting Chad Smith. We ended up meeting the rest of the band. John Frusciante got left behind, so we drove him to the hotel. And I was just this is all amazing. And then he did a second issue of Waffle, and I think it was a freshman year in college. He went to Santa Cruz, I went to Davis, and for the second issue, I interviewed Fife from Tribe Called Quest.
Wow.
So it was a small zine, and it was at a time when like I could get the interview with the second guy,
right,
but not the top tier guy,
right.
And then I think the third one I did that year was with Mr. Bungle.
Wow.
And so it started becoming a thing, and I started. Instead of just doing the Q&A transcript, I started writing a little intro and then the Q&A transcript.
Yeah.
And I realized two things. I realized, one, I really enjoyed interviewing artists and talking to them. And then two is I really loved seeing my name in print. And saying I did that.
Yeah. I mean, it's empowering. It's very fulfilling.
Yeah.
You know? And it's not, you know, there's a lot of steps to get to that point too. So
yeah, and it was weird. Like, it just made me feel fulfilled in a way that school didn't, right?
Right.
So that's sort of like the interviewing part started in high school with this little crew. When I got to Davis, my freshman year, I loved college radio. I used to intern. I had interned one semester at KFJC.
Where's that?
Los Altos Hills.
Oh, interesting.
89.3 KFJC, Los Altos Hills. For a semester when I was in high school, I listened to KZSU in Stanford all the time.
Right.
When I got to Davis, the first thing I did was went to the college radio station. And so I'm obsessed with music. I go to the college radio station, really getting into hip-hop in a way. Like, in high school, like Public Enemy, right? Obviously.
Of course.
Everyone like that. I got into BDP a little bit. And then when I got to freshman year at Davis, listened to college radio, and I heard this show by DJ Zen, Jeff Chang.
Yeah,
wow. And him and another woman who went by the name Voodoo Child, they did the two hip-hop shows. So I started hanging out at the station at Jeff's show. He would let me hang out there.
Oh, cool, man.
And then, like, a few weeks later, I saw this white guy digging through the record stacks, and I met him at the station
yeah.
at Jeff's show, and that was Josh Davis, who DJ Shadow. So we became friendly a little bit, and then these two other guys came. This guy Xavier, and then this guy Tom Shimura, who's like the weirdest guy I'd ever see. He was a total Bay guy. He was like a Japanese hip hop kid, baggy jeans and like and super funny and super charismatic,
right.
and we all just sort of met each other at Jeff's show. And
oh, wow.
And they were Tom was a rapper and Xavier was a DJ and Shadow was a DJ and we weren't. Everyone was very the KDVS at Davis. Their their radio station was a very sort of special place, even amongst college radio stations. They had this incredible music library, and also it was a 5,000 watt college radio station in Central California. So it broadcast 5,000 watts is a lot.
Yeah.
So it broadcasts through a very, very wide geography radius.
Could you get it? You can get it as far as Berkeley or Oakland, though, right? Like
on clear days and clear nights, you could get it like in Vallejo.
Dope.
And very clearly, most nights you could get it as far as Reno and Tahoe.
Wow.
Yeah, and
absolutely Sacramento.
And absolutely Sacramento. So we would hang out at Jeff's show every week, and he was very friendly, and he was very sort of mentor-y even at that stage. He had graduated already from college, but he lived in Sacramento, and so he did this show at Davis, and we would all me, Josh, Xavier, Tom, we would all sort of like see each other and recognize each other and say what's up, but then we would all, the three of them would go pull their records from the stacks and go into the listening rooms and not share what they were listening to. Like they were very sort of like that beat digger mentality of secretive. But at some point it went on for like 9 months, 8 months or 9 months, and so then we became sort of friendly. And we started
all converging at the show.
And so we started just hanging out and started talking about stuff. And I'm not a musician. I had no aspirations to be a rapper or a DJ, but Xavier did, and he's like, I have this friend who's a rapper. His name is Gifted Gab. We have a little group called Blackalicious. Tom, at that time, went by the name Asia Born.
That's right.
And Shadow, who lived in Davis and went to college there, went by Shadow. And so we just decided, I think it was Jeff who was like, listen, like we should start a label and put some stuff out.
Oh, wow.
By that time, I had interned at the radio station, and I got a show. Okay. So sophomore year of college, I had my own show, and Jeff had stopped his show. So I basically took the mantle from him and did the weekly hip hop show.
Did you take his same time slot?
No, because you kind of got to earn it.
Right.
So your first slot, when you have your first show, and they were very, very strict over there, was like you had to do the 3 to 6 a.m. shift.
Oh,
so I did that for a semester, and then I did midnight to 3. And I realized midnight to 3, Jeff's show was, I think, Wednesdays, midnight to 3. That was the hip hop slot.
Right. People knew it for that.
Yeah,
too,
you
right?
didn't want a show from 9 to midnight. You wanted the midnight to 3 slot. So that's a slot I occupied for most of my time there. A couple other people did shows in our crew, but then I think it was like 1991, my sophomore year, was like when we started talking about like we should put out a record. Like Josh at that time was doing mixes for KMEL. And he was DJing a lot, and his best friend was a guy named Stan, who went by the name Eighth Wonder, who did all the artwork. Mm-hmm. Tom was a rapper on his own. X was, he was DJing and making beats, and very much in the, like, I think Pete Rock was like his like hero, right? Like it was very much in that mold, right? And we formed a little crew. We put out this record, and we called ourselves Soul Sides. And the reason we called ourselves Soul Sides is because the first 12-inch we put out was going to be Shadow on one side and Asia Born on the other side.
Right.
And I don't know who came up with the name, but we're like, that's what the label should be called, Soul Sides. And each record we put out will be one of our artists on one side, the other on the other side. Right. And so that's when we formed it in 91. And me and Jeff were the only two people who weren't musicians, and everybody else was a musician.
So were you guys like the de facto A&Rs or something? Or like, would you coordinate the manufacturing? And
well, so what we did was, we decided to put out this record, and Jeff did a lot of the heavy lifting because he was in the music industry from a college level. Right. He did the CMJ reports, and he knew all these people.
Right.
And then I think, the Gavin convention was really big then.
Sure.
In the Bay. So like I went to my first Gavin convention in 1991.
Incredible.
And it was like, I remember, meeting Run DMC and LL Cool J. They were just posted up at the bar at this one show, right? And it's like Jeff went up to them and was like, "Hey, what's up? Blah blah blah. This is our crew. We're from Davis and blah blah blah." And like I got promo record guys for the first time, and they would bring us into shows. I met Dan Charnas. I think Dan actually was the one who introduced me to Run DMC and LL Cool J. And I remember meeting Dan Charnas then, and we went out after one of these shows. We went out to go get cheesesteaks in North Beach, and talked till like 2 a.m. And he was at Deaf American at the time,
right.
And I remember just he was the coolest. He was cool as shit. Like he was just so fucking nice,
right.
And
he's an incredible writer. I mean, his book is incredible.
Yeah, and
awesome.
It's funny because like I saw him recently, and we hadn't seen each other in a long time, but like he's just one of the he's a decent, great human being. But that was when I met him. It was the '91 Gavin convention, and it was just like I think there was a fight in the lobby of one of the hotels, and so it was just like it was just this energy around it. And,
it's exciting.
It was very exciting.
It's also like the golden era of college radio too, for the most part. It's getting there.
Yeah, especially with hip hop, right?
Yeah.
So like hip hop,
that's where my frame of reference.
I mean, hip hop as an industry thrived on college radio and community radio. Like
Absolutely.
that's the only those are the only stations playing real hip hop
right
at the time. And so we got so very quickly as I had my show and started reporting when I played on my show and getting records sent to me. I very quickly you realize you're a part of a community, and that was really important for me because I didn't know up from down, right? I was a fucking kid who I didn't, I grew up in the suburbs as a first generation Indian, first generation born in this country. I just didn't know up from down, and Jeff is very political and very very fucking smart, so. He was very early on taught me that hip hop it wasn't just a music to be into, it was really music that came from a community, and I had to respect that.
Right. And that's really in the Bay, that's I think it really has always been pretty prevalent, right?
Yeah, you can't be a knucklehead in the Bay. You can't get away with not understanding privilege and not understanding where the music comes from.
Right.
You're when I was in high school, Too Short, I used to listen to Too Short tapes, right? And used to listen to KML on Friday nights, and they would do hip hop mixes, and and hearing people on the radio and shouting out communities all around the Bay, you're very much forced to understand that. And Jeff was really instrumental very early on to be like this is you're a visitor, but you're also part of it, right? You have to respect those boundaries.
So he was a bit of a mentor.
He was he was my first mentor, and he was a mentor for all of us, I think. But yeah, so while that's happening with Soul Sides and at the radio station, and I ended up becoming like program director or music director. I became the hip hop director at KDVS, and then I became the music director for 2 years.
Nice, right.
And that was my lane. Like I ran that shop at KDVS, right? And Jeff left there, and he was working, but we were doing Soul Sides, and I think we put together like $750 to open up a bank account, and I still have that checkbook. I think I put in like $250, and two other people put in $250, and we put out this record, and Shadow was getting a name for himself, and
he had already done the Hollywood Basics thing.
While we were sort of before we put out our first release, while we were being a crew, like basically hanging out with each other.
Yeah.
That's when he started doing the Hollywood Basic stuff, and I met Funkin' Klein right the next year at the Gavin, right when he was in a wheelchair, but he was just this, and Funkin' Klein used to talk so much shit. He was just like, where's that white motherfucker, Josh? He was just such a shit talker, and so I got to know the people, and then and subsequently you got to know the other people who were doing college radio around the Bay.
Right.
People like Benny B, Kevy Kev at Stanford, people down in Santa Cruz. So
there's a lot of great stations.
Davey D was I think Calex, and
I think so.
No, Benny was at Calex. I think Davey D was at Cape Poo.
Billy Jam,
of course. And so we started. We would see each other at shows all the time. It started feeling like a community. Like I felt attached to something, not just at Davis, but then in the Bay, and then nationally. When a publicist would come in with an artist and want to come by the station, and you're just like, oh shit! Like I know someone in New York now, right? Like and so while all that was happening, I started to write more, and a couple of hip hop zines popped up in the Bay. One in particular was the Bomb Hip Hop magazine.
Yes, which I'd like to show you some,
sure,
if I can.
Yeah, and so my first piece, I pitched Dave Paul. I was like, "Can I do some interviews for you?" I sent him my clips from these zines, and he's like, "Yeah, cool." And
how'd you send them? Did you fax them over? Did you put them in the mail? Because if it's 92, 93, you can't really.
I know. I think I really do think I faxed them to him.
The fax was an incredible tool, especially if you're utilizing the radio station's fax machine.
Exactly, you're utilizing the radio station's computer and fax machine.
Right.
And so the Bomb started, and I wrote for the Bomb, and then other regional zines are starting. Flavor up in Seattle, One Nut Network up in Connecticut, I think.
Yeah, I got a bunch of those on the floor in the other room.
Yeah, and then DJ Steph was doing Vinyl Exchange.
Yes.
So it was like, I started writing for little indie hip hop zines, and then I started writing for weekly trade. Alt weeklies in the Bay.
Oh, nice! Really?
And then I started really simultaneous to that in school. I went in. I was doing an econ major, but then I started taking English classes and really started loving to write.
Nice. Yeah.
So,
because what did you go to school for, and what was your intention as far as like?
I was undeclared when I went in, and I was originally going to try to do chemistry, but I took a year of chemistry and I hated it, and so I switched to econ, which I loved, and then I started, as I was doing more interviews and writing, I was like, I got to get better at this, and then I was taking English classes and really loving writing about literature, and I sort of put it all together. It all sort of hit my sophomore, junior year of college. And that's when I started taking writing seriously. And my DJ name was Jazzbo, and so I started writing under Jazzbo because I thought that's what you do in the hip hop magazines, right?
Well, that's the first. The first time I ever heard that word too was when Black Alicious shouted it out at the end of the
Swan Lake.
On Swan Lake, which was a huge, really their first huge record. I feel like
it was the first. There was their first release,
outside,
really. So,
which I think I don't know if this is it or not. This isn't Swan Lake. This is... Oh, it is Swan Lake.
Yeah, that's Swan Lake. Yeah, that's the second record we put out. So I actually brought something for you.
Is that right?
I brought you... Pocket. So, Soulside's first release, SS001, was Shadow on one side and Lyrics Born, but at the time Asia Born on the other.
Right.
While we were waiting for our 12 inches to press, we made some cassettes. We made 200 cassettes, and they arrived before our vinyl did.
Yeah.
And so this was technically the first release we ever had.
Wow.
And so we started giving them away. But when the vinyl came in, we put the cassettes on a shelf, and they sat in my closet for years.
Really?
I think we only gave like 50 away. Because when the 12 inches came in, we started giving those away and started selling those. So I have all the cassettes. So that is my gift to you.
Oh man, thank you so much.
At some point in my head, I thought they'd be worth a lot of money, but they're now more just sentimental, historical.
Yeah, and we were talking about that too before we started recording too. I mean, this you can't even put a price on what it took to kind of get to this point too. As the first one, and Eighth Wonder did the classic kind of hip hop artwork.
Yeah.
He must. I wonder did he ever do any covers for the Bomb because of that
I feel
stylistically.
I don't know. Actually, I feel like he might have. He did. I know he did some artwork for Deaf American.
Oh, cool.
Like he did a couple like.
Did you hook that up?
No, I mean Stan was great. I think when we met Dan Charnas, Dan started to hear about what we were doing up in Davis, and so he knew about Josh, and then. I think he hit up Stan to do artwork. I think it was for Quest the Mad Lad.
Yeah.
And then somebody else that they had on that label at the same time. But he
wasn't Chino XL. That was maybe a little later.
No, it might have been. What was it? I don't think it was Chino. It was definitely Quest the Mad Lad and it was somebody else. But he did the interior label artwork for those artists. But Stan then dropped out of our crew.
Okay.
I don't know the story, so I shouldn't really speak on it. But
it's all good.
He ended up dropping out of our crew. He didn't. I think he had a lot of pressure from his parents, a lot of pressure from religion.
Oh, to do something else.
To not be involved with this hip hop thing.
Oh, interesting.
So,
yeah.
But
it's not, another era, kind of the pressures of another era.
And parents and I think so. Yeah, so that 4 years I was at Davis was it was like I was writing for local hip hop magazines. I was getting better at writing and wanting to get better at my craft. I was DJing on the air. We were doing this label, Soulsides.
Yeah.
It just was like that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting too because I mean you're just in the middle of college, you're still basically teenager, early 20, barely 20 or something.
And growing up in the suburbs, a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old at Davis, California is not the same as a 20-year-old who grew up in New York.
Seriously.
I just did not know the world. But so 92, 93, Jeff was writing for Herb magazine, and I was reading Herb, and we were getting written about in Herb, and I started to meet those people through Jeff, like Brian Cross.
Yeah, B plus. Yeah,
B plus. Tracy McGregor, Todd Roberts, Raymond Roker, and I thought my writing was good enough in these regional zines like Bomb and Flavor to hit up Herb, and so the first thing I wrote for Herb was I think it was a feature on A Tribe Called Quest.
Really?
Yeah, and it was like, wow, like, man, that was just like the fucking best thing in the world.
Yeah, and and I don't want to backtrack too far, but this issue of Bomb from November of 1993, issue 24, this is actually your interview with A Tribe Called Quest in this, which is pretty hilarious. I mean, if you just kind of, I don't know if you remember this exchange, but obviously Q-Tip maybe was not perhaps that into talking that day. It's like very short answers, and it's pretty hilarious because this is the style of journalism that I love too, coming up as well, where you interject enough of your personality where it's like it creates a great texture to the story, but it's not overbearing, which I find some writing of today's contemporary writing to be a little overbearing with the writers.
Yeah, it's about as much about the writer's personality and their philosophy.
This is like you actually showing some, desperately trying to get him to talk about the record, which this is from when Midnight Marauders came out, which is arguably one of their greatest works by far.
Yeah, it's funny because somewhere between 92 and 93, I realized that because for me it was only about the music.
Right.
Like what I remember is when we got Low End Theory into the KDVS, I remember we got it the week before it was released in stores, and I remember they would send us multiple copies, and I remember taking a CD home and listening to it all night, and just like, oh my god. So the radio station would get service with records around release date. Right. What I realized from writing is I would get records in advance, 3 or 4 months in advance.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow. So, and then I realized somewhere in '93, and I think Midnight Marauders was the first one where I got hit up to write a bio, and I said, if I write the bio, I get it even before any of the writers get it. I'm the first one that gets it.
Right.
Outside
of what they're going off of, too.
So I got asked to write the bio for Midnight Marauders.
Wow.
So I got the cassette for Midnight Marauders at the end of my sophomore year or junior year of college.
Okay.
And I spent the entire summer. I taught summer school that summer, and I also interned at the San Francisco DA's office. And I was living at home for the summer with my parents, so it was a 45-minute, hour-long commute each way, every day, for five days a week. And I would listen to Midnight Marauders front to back over and over again that whole summer.
Wow.
And when I got advances from my writing career, I would play previews on my radio show.
Wow.
So my show was like I made it work for me. Like, people who listen to my show would hear shit that they wouldn't even hear on the big shows in the Bay, because I was a writer. I was getting these advanced cassettes, and I'd mix them into my things, and I'd be like, "Oh, we got the new Tribe. I'm gonna play a little bit," and nobody at New York at Jive Records is gonna hear my show to know that I was like playing this shit before.
It's just enough off the radar, but the people in the Bay could really get it.
So I had a little racket going with that. But I remember I would do one interview with an artist and then parcel out different pieces for it. Okay. I'd do I'd do one thing for the Bomb. I'd do an album review I think I did an album review for Herb, or I think The Source maybe. That might have been my first thing for The Source. But yeah, it was like and then I realized you can't do that. That's not really kosher.
What, write the bio and write
the bio, do one interview, and then parcel out a story out of it for a magazine. Like, again, I think the industry itself was finding its footing, so there weren't really any rules. But at some point, it started to develop a little ethics, and so you started to realize, hey, this doesn't feel right.
Sure.
And then as I started sending my clips to bigger magazines, they would be like, no, we want you to just do this for us. You're interviewing them under our banner. You can't use that for something else.
Right.
Herb, I think, was the first magazine that really explained to me, and that was the first place I wrote for that felt like I was writing for a real magazine.
Yeah.
And then I remember sending my herb clips to the Source, and they would give me little things to do. They always wanted me to review E40 albums or Too Short albums because I was from the Bay, right? And I was like, that's not what I want to do. I love New York shit.
So Herb was a pretty unique magazine for its time too. I feel like, because it embodied multiple genres. It was like there's so many strictly hip hop magazines, and if you were yet to get to the point of say writing for like a Rolling Stone or Spin, which only also didn't really cover a ton of hip hop stuff. If I'm remembering right.
Yeah. I mean, they covered, the Spin was the magazine at the time that covered like integrated hip hop into this sort of like alternative music mentality.
Right.
I think Legs McNeil and Charles Aaron and people like that were writing for Spin.
Aaron.
But Herb was. So the reality was that I loved music. I loved hip hop, but I wasn't only listening to hip hop. Like, when I would fill in other people's radio shows at Davis, at KDVS, I would do a jazz show.
Oh, cool.
Or I'd do like an indie rock show. Like, I loved music.
Right.
And Herb was the first magazine that articulated that people loved music, not just a genre. That dance music came from the same place that hip hop came from, that came from the same place that jazz came from, that came from the same place as, and Herb was really founded out of rave culture.
Absolutely.
So it had more ravey leanings than hip hop leanings, but it was the first genreless magazine in a way. They would put a producer, a dance producer on the cover, just like they would put a hip hop group on the cover.
Right.
So that was really fun for me, and it was run like a real magazine. Like it was beautiful photography in a way that like Bomb wasn't. Right. It was Bomb is running press photos, whereas Herb magazine was hiring photographers to shoot artists specifically for them.
Yeah, and they had an aesthetic that was really it was very LA. It was
very well designed.
Yeah.
And so I was obsessed. One of my first obsessions, obviously from the Bay, was the stuff coming out from the Bay, like Souls of Mischief and Dell. But then I was also obsessed with all the Freestyle Fellowship, Lemert Park, Good Life Cafe stuff.
Of course.
So I was writing a lot about that in Herb, in Bomb, in other magazines, trying to spread the gospel of Freestyle Fellowship.
Yeah.
And Herb, even though I wasn't from LA, they let me write about it because I think they liked how I wrote about it. And I would write something about the fellowship, and B+'s photo would accompany my story, and I'd just be like, "Oh my God, this is incredible!"
Right? Yeah.
And he was the first photographer that I obsessed over because I realized, the way I'm writing, he's taking photos, and his photos was incredible. Like and it made me want to write better because of that. Like as I started writing for new places, I was like, I got to get better and better. I would read the Source, and the Source at the time was like James Bernard and those guys, Cheo Coker, and they were incredible writers. And I was like, holy shit! Like, if I want to do this, I have to like really find my lane and really work on my craft of writing.
Yeah. The Source was at its best during that time.
Yeah.
Really incredible writers that I think. Yeah, it's funny too when you go back to like I was thinking about this when you were sort of explaining Jeff. At the radio station and how you sort of followed him and sort of in a way that college and nonprofit or community radio stations of that time, the people that especially the hip hop programmers to a large degree, the way they would utilize that they would be the makings of the next wave of the music industry as far as like working at labels and coordinating albums and clearly, which is what happened with Soul Sides.
Yeah.
But I think that was mirrored almost at the exact same time with magazines with print journalism too. And again, I'm speaking kind of specifically to hip hop, but
hip hop journalism became a thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the early '90s, it was creating its own. Hip hop was not being covered by the big magazines, so they started their own.
Right.
And they started it regionally, and then they started it nationally with magazines like The Source and Rap Pages. And that was thrilling because you were a part of something new and something that everyone in hip hop read The Source.
Yeah.
And so I started obsessing over the writers and editors whose bylines I was reading as much as I was obsessing over the artists that they covered. Mm-hmm. And with magazines like Rap Pages and Herb, I was obsessing over the photographers and the designers.
Yeah.
And it was just like, when you're young and sort of like learning about the world still, and you're a part of something, and you're right up in it, it's really, really thrilling.
Yeah.
And that time period, I don't think will be replicated in the same way. I think it's happening. I think it happened in the early 2000s with music blogs. I think if you were a music blogger in the early 2000s and you were breaking artists through your blog, that was probably very similar, a thrilling thing to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I think now it's happening with a lot of people who are transitioning from like hip hop journalism into like TV, film scriptwriters or showrunners.
Exactly.
Like, I think we're on the cusp of a big explosion of hip hop related content from people who grew up in that era.
Sure.
And are almost doing the same thing now in a different industry.
Well, you look at Luke Cage. That's a good example of that.
Right? And Luke Cage and Carlito Rodriguez, who's writing for Empire. I think.
Oh, cool! I didn't know that.
Selwyn Hines just sold a show to HBO that they're looking at to be their next Game of Thrones.
Interesting. Okay.
You've got people like Chris X, who's a dear friend and a longtime journalist himself, who's doing script writing right now. And
you guys shared many pages in these magazines.
And that's the other thing that was cool is like I would go to different cities and meet people based on my writing and based on Soul Sides, and you share bylines with people and you meet them, and it's just like there's this like brotherhood, right? A camaraderie that happens. I will never forget. I moved to New York in '99.
Okay.
And my first week in New York, I was going to see two shows. One was Mike Ladd at SOBs, I think, and the other, I forget what the second show was. But I'm at SOBs, and there's a tap on my shoulder. And I've been in New York like 5 days, right? There's a tap on my shoulder, and it's this like big Jesus-y looking dude, and he's like, "Are you Jazzbo? Are you Joseph Patel?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm John Caramonica." And I was like, "Oh shit!" I was like, I knew his byline, and we ended up hanging out. He was going to the same two shows I was going out. I was like, "How did you know who I was?" He's like, "I just know." And I was like, "That's crazy." And we ended up becoming like best friends off that. Like it just was cool. And Huastu, same thing. Dave Tompkins. Dave and I actually met because he was one of the first people. He was writing from the same magazines I was at the same time,
right.
And he was also one of the first people that like wrote about Soul Sides.
Yeah.
And so me and him, I was collecting like unreleased stuff and demos and all this LA Underground stuff, and I would send it to him, and he was Dave Tompkins doing Dave Tompkins things, and so he would send me mixtapes, and we would.
What was he sending you?
He was sending me like unreleased Mantronics stuff, or like when we started getting into like really trippy music like Tortoise and all that stuff, and like we would send just music to each other. But my mixtapes are very clean and very like this song, this is the title, and this is the artist, this is the title, very clean. And his was, he would write a story on the cover, and it was nonsensical but really sensical, like really made sense, but like in a very weird Dave Tompkins way. And he'd write some like he'd always write the artist and then the song title and then some impression of the song that he had, what it reminded him of, and he'd insert that in the tape in a separate piece of paper. And like I think we would trade tapes like that, and like I have all these Dave Tompkins like mixtapes from the 90s that are their experiences more than they're just tapes. Like,
well, reading him is an experience too. He's an incredible writer.
Yeah.
He told me, I asked him ahead of us meeting up how you guys met.
Oh, yeah.
And initially, I think the way he explained it to me was in like 1994. He called you. So you, by way of just what you were doing back with Soul Sides, you were possibly the de facto publicist or something like that?
Yeah, sort of like publicist, record promoter, right?
Yeah.
Like I was like calling my cohorts at other radio stations to play the record, or we'd send it to them. So it was sort of like that. And then again, it was just trying to find a lane, like not being like me and Jeff being the only two non-musicians, but Jeff was also like our father.
Yeah.
He was the ringleader. Like we learned so much from him, and he was really taking our cues from him. So for me to find my lane, I was just excited to be a part of this, and was doing whatever I could, right? Like I would take the notes during the meetings. I would make sure to follow up on the stuff that we decided we were going to do.
Were you in the studio with them?
Sometimes, but not a lot. But the studio actually, we recorded a lot. Josh would record a lot of stuff at his house. but we did a lot of the mixing at Dan the Automators in South San Francisco.
Yeah.
So we would have to drive from Davis there.
That's a haul.
And we all would go together.
Wow.
And I remember when a year after we started Soul Sides, Lateef landed on campus.
Yeah.
And he's just a different cat. Like Lateef is just he's an incredible human being. He fell in with us right away because he told
me that you basically you brought him in.
I mean, he was hanging around the radio station, and I was just like, "Who are you? Like, you're definitely from the Bay. You're sort of like, caramel skinned, dreadlocks. You rap. Like, come hang out with our crew."
Yeah,
and then we all fell in really, really easily. But what's funny is we've been recording, I think Blacklistless was recording and mixing at Automator's house, and Shadow was doing his finishing touches at Automator's, and Automator was helping him because he had the experience.
Right.
And we showed up to Automator's house, and while they were working in the studio, we would just, those of us who weren't working on it would just sit in the basement watching TV or listening to the radio. We brought Lateef once, and Dan looked at Lateef and was just like, and Dan was the weirdest dude then. And he lived at it was his parents' house, and his mom would like come down screaming at him sometimes, and he'd yell back at her. And we're just like, where the fuck are we? We showed up with Lateef for the first time, and Dan took one look at Lateef and was like, nope, he can't come in here. I don't want him in here. And we're like, well, if he can't come, then we're not coming. He's like, well, then don't come. Wow. So Lateef had to go like sit in the car for the first night that we brought him. Dan did not like him at all, and I never understood why. And then finally he got used to us bringing Lateef around, and he finally gave in. But yeah, and then the other thing that was funny about our crew then was we could never go to a show unless all of us could get in. Like, so if De La's playing in Oakland, we would all have to be able to get in. And so that fell on me to hit up the publicist or the record promo people to get on the list. Right. I need to get on the list plus 4. Right. And Jeff would call. He's like, I need to get on the list plus 4. And we would get to the door, and sometimes they'd be like, we're not letting 8 people in. And we're like, well, I remember Xavier and Tom were like, well, if we can't all get in, then none of us can go in. And I was like, that's nuts. I just drove an hour into the Bay to watch De La. Like, I'm not going to not see De La. Right. You guys can get your way in, or you can pay to get in. But, like...
That's some Bay Area, like, solidarity, like, punk rock thing for sure.
And then the other thing that was happening that I want to shout out at the time was that all of the college radio DJs in the Bay... We formed a coalition called the Bay Area Hip Hop Coalition. Oh, yeah, wow. And that was really Benny B's doing, I think. And the reason we did that was because he's like, look, like, we're a region that has power. We have a lot of stations here, and we have a lot of reach. Right. And if we form this coalition to report records in sync with each other, and then we wield some power to have artists come visit us and to do drops and things like that. And that was really... my first time being exposed to like community building like that, right? And really like, like it comes from roots in labor unions and things like that, and community organizing, like, and it was really fun because it was like that's how I got to know all the DJs at all the other stations. We'd have these like monthly meetings, and it worked. Like we started getting artists coming to Davis to visit our station, know, and like Master Ace coming by, and. Big. It was cool. Like, it was cool.
How did you meet, or when did you meet, if you can recall, DJ Steph?
Yeah. So after I graduated from Davis, I was still writing, and we were still doing Soul Sides, although I sort of was getting a lot of pressure from my parents to find a real job. Sure. They had no interest in me doing this label thing. And it really actually caused my falling out with Soul Sides. I had to leave Soul Sides, or... I either got kicked out or I left on my own. I think it was both. Because I was interning and trying to work, and my parents were just like, I just didn't have the time to put into Soul Sides, especially if I wasn't making any money off it.
Sure, right? You can only do that for so long.
Yeah, and it was just like we weren't making money as a label, and so I had to find a real job, and I wasn't able to hold my end of being a part of that crew, so we mutually parted ways in like 95, 96.
So this is like the Mowax thing even happened at this point?
Yeah, the Mowax thing happened at that point, and when that was the first thing where I was like, wait, why is Shadow going to put out an album on Mowax and it's not going to be through Soul Sides? Right. And that was really puzzling to me. I was like, but why aren't we getting any money off this? And I didn't understand. And I was like, if Soulsides is just going to be a label where you put out your records when you feel like it, then that's probably not a future for me.
Right.
And,
I can understand that.
And so I really had to. It was a tough thing, and I think, but we all thought it was sort of best. Like, we're all still cool, and then, but I gotta go find a real job and do that. So with Soulsides off my plate, I started really writing a lot. But I was still a part of the Bay community, and Steph was someone I met because what she started doing is when an artist would come to town, she would start hosting the meet and greets. And so she invited me to the meet and greets to meet company flows in town, like and artists I'd never heard of,
right.
or I just got the record and didn't know anything about. She was really instrumental and it wasn't just for radio DJs. It was like for people like myself who didn't have a show anymore but was writing about music.
Right.
And so she was like one of the first people that made me feel post Soulsides that I was still part of this community and I still had value and still, I was writing for Vinyl Exchange and we would talk every now and then about what I was listening to. But she'd organize these like meet and greets 2 or 3 times a month and I would go to those and she was just the sweetest, nicest person. And whether I was writing for magazines or whether you were just starting out on college radio, like she just treated everyone the same. If you were cool, you were cool.
Yeah.
And
great connector.
Great connector, and just like a fucking incredible human being.
Yeah.
Like just cool, and nice and sweet and genuine, and you never thought it was a front or political. And you just, every time you interacted with Steph, it just, like from the time I met her in like 95, 96 to like the last time I talked to her, like 6 or 7 months ago on Twitter, like she just was like, you left that interaction in a better place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
even briefly, like, I feel like she was such a great kind of representation of the Bay in a lot of ways because, like, when we did the tribute show for her, it was such a range genre, like, micro genres of hip-hop that otherwise wouldn't really associate with each other. Or
young, old, multicultural, male, female, people who did graph and people who DJ'd and bar owners and bartenders and like it was just like that was Steph.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's cool. Just and you're a part of that world. Although I think with the writing too, you reached a lot of people outside of the Bay. So it's like that's what always sort of intrigued me about your history. I mean, I really know you not only from the Black Alicious record, but really from the Byline and Herb. Which so many great writers kind of not necessarily started, but they kind of in some ways started, coming into their own stylistically as far as journalists. I mean, with yourself and Hua and Dave Tompkins and Oliver Wang, who really he's the one who put me on. So I came I started writing at Herb maybe in 95 or 6 around that time. And it was really because of him and through like those primitive online news groups, rec.music.hiphop.
Sure,
Because he would post his playlist from Calix, from Berkeley. And I was doing college radio when I was in high school, and I would do the same. And then it was like an exchange of ideas and shit. So he got on as like the 12-inch editor at Herb or something like that. And started pulling people from the news group, just a few. And it was that era of like, the indie boom of 95, 6, and so on, as far as the 12 inches goes.
Yeah, and it was. I think it was an important thing that, to like when blogs are really big, it's like people would write their own blogs and become writers and find their voice that way. But there's something about writing for a publication and feeling a part of a community that I will always appreciate about that time.
Right.
Because I wouldn't know Oliver or Dave Tompkins or Hua or John Caramonica or anybody like that if it wasn't for those days writing for Herb, right? And I would take my clips in Herb that looked great, and I would then use those to write for places like The Source, Vibe, Rap Pages, and whatever.
Yeah, level up from
there. And one of my first, the next notch in my sort of evolution was when I got to write my first cover story for Rap Pages.
What was that on?
It was on The Roots.
Nice.
96.
Dope.
And I remember I got flown to Philly and that was a thrill, right?
That's nice.
To a city to write.
Was that your first time for writing a story that you got?
No, the first time I got flown for a story was shortly before that. I wrote a piece on A Tribe Called Quest, and I got flown to New York, and that was. I remember they put me up at the Radisson Empire.
Okay.
And I had never been to New York as an adult, so I was like just intimidated by the fucking city.
Well, this was your first time in New York?
First time in New York as an adult, right? And I remember the publicist Theola Borden, who is I still actually work with, we're still in the business together. We still work with each other. But she came up and she picked me up at my hotel and took me down the West Village and walked me around New York just to introduce me to the city because I didn't know anything and I was so scared to get around.
Wow.
And I remember she sent Tribe, knowing I didn't know my way around the city, she sent Tribe to my hotel.
Oh, shit.
So Q-Tip and Ali Shaheed Muhammad go to the front desk of reception to ask for me. I come down, we sit in the park across the street, and I did my interview there. And this is before Beats, Rhymes, and Life came out.
Wow.
And I had heard the album, I had had it for a couple months, and I remember I went back to the hotel after the interview, and the people at the hotel were just like jockeying me. They're like, you know Tip and Ali, you know Tribe, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, they're New York celebrities.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, we were sitting right across the street from the bus stop, and the bus would come out, and people would just jump and be like, oh my God, Q-Tip.
Right.
And so a few months after that, I got flown to Philly to interview the Roots, and it was for Rap Pages. And that's when I became friends with Questlove, because I interviewed them, and then Questlove just was like, yeah, let's like come hang out. And so I was like hanging out at the house all day for like 2 days. And the first night I met him, we hung out in his room listening to music for 6-7 hours, just talking about music.
Wow.
And he played me something that night. He had just met D'Angelo. And he and D'Angelo, when they met, they played for like 14 hours together.
Wow.
He played me those tapes. He was playing me.
Wow.
So we're sitting here talking about music, and I'm listening to him and D'Angelo as a 2-person band playing hip-hop covers.
What?
And I was just like, oh my God. We ordered cheesesteaks, and we sat on his doorstep, and he called me a car at like 5 in the morning to go back to my hotel.
Wow.
And I was just like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. This is incredible. And I remember writing this Root story. And at the time, Dream Hampton was the editor in chief of the magazine.
Uh-huh.
I forget whoever was editor in chief before her had left, and she was filling in. And she changed my life as a writer because I wrote this story. I was such a knucklehead as a writer then. I thought I was like protecting the hip hop realm between what real hip hop was and what fake hip hop was.
Right. Well, that was the era for that.
And that was the era for that. And I didn't see the bad boy shit, and I didn't see Jay-Z as like real hip hop. Right. I saw it as like commercial hip hop,
sure.
And Jermaine Dupri and all that stuff. And I was like holding it down for like Freestyle Fellowship and Farside and Souls of Mischief and the Roots, right? Uh-huh. And she took my first draft I turned in. She called me up and she just tore into me.
Really?
And it's the most incredible lesson, maybe one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned, not only as a writer but just as a person. I was so sure of myself as a writer, and that I was representing the real hip hop guard, writing about the Roots. And she's like, listen, hip hop is whatever little black kids say it is. It's not your job to say what it is. It's not your job to protect something. It is an evolving art form and culture, and it is whatever little black kids say it is. If today it's yellow and blue and tomorrow they call it purple and green, then hip hop is purple and green. Wow. And you have to understand that. And I was just like, wow, you're right. And that changed everything for me.
Yeah, wow.
And from that, then I turned in a draft of a story that really, I think, was better because of her editing. It made me a better writer, but it also just opened up this lens for me that was like, it changed my life ever since. And now that's why, like, I'm not a crusty old dude right now that's like hating on like SoundCloud rappers,
right? Because
that's what is hip hop is that. It's what we grew up through, and that's stuff I'll love, and really, but I also love everything new right now, like right. Because it really is just what little black kids say it is, and that's exciting. And they find their own voice and their own style, and their own representation of that based on the times, and that's what hip hop is.
Well, in the arc of your career, you've obviously been able to navigate as far as a writer and beyond just being a writer, because now you've done like. It's not as regimented as being a contributor or a columnist or freelancer like it was 25 years ago, 20 years ago. But you've been able to keep a consistent level as a career through, and it was funny. I was going through some old tapes because I know I have an interview where I filmed you in
Really?
the year 2000.
Really?
And where I think must have been Vice, but I don't know.
No, it was 360 Hip Hop.
Yes.
Yeah, 360 Hip Hop.
I remember because I did Group
Wow.
Home the same day when they were on Replay Records. So
Oh, man.
if that says anything. But yeah, I got to find it too. 'Cause
Yeah,
it was from either 99 or 2000.
That was in Chelsea when we worked at Chelsea, I think.
Yeah,
360
yeah.
Hip Hop was like Selwyn, Sheena Lester, Chris X, me, Caramonica, Jeff Chang. Like, that was a fucking crew.
Yeah, all-star team.
That was an
right
all-star
there.
crew. The whatever we built was trash, but it was like, yeah, it was the .com bubble.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of those writers have created their own lane in different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, Caramonica's,
Yeah.
went the Times route. And, Jeff is a respected author. But you've been able to kind of navigate from, one establishment to another, which is that's not an easy task.
Yeah.
At all.
Um,
So I'm curious about that too. Just because you have to have a high level of savviness and panache. I mean, to be able to keep a career. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, and I think I figured it out sooner and faster than some of my peers. But
Sure.
Your last question for me. So the thing, there's three things I loved about writing.
Yeah.
As I started to do it for more and more years. One was I loved the proximity to artists, like talking to artists about music they made that I loved, and being able to ask them about it and how did you make that and where did that come from?
Right.
Like, that is a fucking drug.
Yeah.
And being able to talk to Dilla about beats.
So you interviewed him.
I did one of the first interviews with Dilla when he post Farside pre Slum Village.
Wow.
And again, my hustle was I would write the bio. So
which
I wrote the
bio
bio
was
for
it?
Slum Village.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. The first tape.
Did you?
And I'd heard about Slum Village through Q-Tip, through Questlove,
Right.
through D'Angelo.
Right.
They were all fucking talking. Common. They were all fucking talking about Dilla, and Slum Village in particular. And I was just like, okay. So I called up A&M and I was like, I forgot the publicist there. I was like, I want to write the bio. So they set me up with an interview with Slum Village.
So you pursued it.
Yeah, so I would like that's how I wanted to get it before everyone else did.
Yeah,
right?
I did.
And then once I wrote the bio, because my name's not on the bio, I would then write a story in a magazine about based either partly on my bio interview or set up something new.
Yeah. Right.
And it was also a way for me to get work because I would be able to pitch pitch the source. Hey, I want to write the review for the Slum Village album. They're like, well, it's not out. The advances aren't out yet. I'm like, I have it. Like I would get work that way, right? But I love being able to talk to artists. Like, I wrote a cover story on Organized Confusion for Rap Pages, and Organized Confusion, one of my favorite rap groups of all time. Like,
of course.
Pharaoh on that second Organized album. I mean, oh my god,
it's incredible.
and so being able to talk to those artists about the music they made and about the artistic process, like that was just it for me. Two was the music, being able to hear music and hear it first, and being able to frame the music for the public before they hear it for the first time.
Yes.
And to point out things that I was noticing in the music and be able to help guide the conversation around an artist's release. That was also very thrilling for me. And then three was, again, seeing my name in print. At some point, as I started writing for bigger magazines, I was like, I want to do this as a career. So my byline, I dropped Jazzbo as my byline, and took up my formal name, Joseph Patel, as a byline. And so, but I still loved seeing my name in print. But freelance writing was hard, and it was hard.
It's hard to make money.
It's hard to make money. And there's a period in the late 90s where I was living at home and I felt fly because I would see my name in national magazines and I had friends all over the country and I would get flown places to do interviews, but I wasn't making enough money to live on my own, despite having a college degree, and just was no money in it. And I remember I was at home. I think my father had a heart attack and that he survived, but it just was like living at home in your mid-20s is not fresh. and I was and I became depressed for a period of time, but I didn't recognize that. And then I was like, okay, I have I have to figure out a way to get a job and like make a career out of this. But also as a writer, freelancing, you don't really get a chance to develop your voice. And I was writing for magazines, and if I wrote for Vibe, I'd have to write in a Vibe voice. If I wrote for The Source, I'd have to write in a Source voice. I wasn't being able to develop my own voice.
Right.
And I wasn't really good as a writer. Like I enjoyed what I did, but I wasn't able to develop my craft at one place with an editor who worked with me. Like it was just hustling for wherever I could get, published.
Sure, and those editors that each, like, say, Vibe as opposed to, like, another, like a Rolling Stone or whatever.
Yeah.
You have to, they'll frame your work into their kind of aesthetic, right?
Yeah, and they were also, a lot of those natural magazines viewed me as the West Coast guy. So, hey, we want to do something on Corrupt and Daz. Will you do it? And I'm like, I don't like that. I don't like Corrupt and Daz. I want to do something on Black Star. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, and I realized I wasn't, unless I moved to New York or LA, I wasn't going to be taken seriously as a writer, right? So I started thinking about, like, all right, I need to find a job. I need to be able to earn a living. And that sort of coincided with the late 90s .com boom. And I got hired by one of my editors at Raygun, who took over a .com job at CD Now. And I started freelancing for him. And then he's like, listen, I'm staffing up. I'll move you to New York. I'll pay you a salary. And I was like, great. So I moved to New York in 99 with a .com job and earning a living as a writer, being able to freelance on the side, and being in the mix in New York. And it was amazing. And
well, you also must, by that time, I mean, you have a network of people in the industry that
network of people, and telling the writers at the magazines that I'm in New York now, and being able to meet them and see the editors and hang out with them. That's how you ended up getting work. And I was like, like I really fucked up by not being in New York or LA. Right. And I realized that when I moved to New York. But I had this .com job, and it was great, and New York was fucking fun. Like, sure. After my first trip as an adult in '96 interviewing Tribe, I would come out 2, 3, 4 times a year. I'd stay a few days extra, and I wouldn't sleep the whole time I was there. My first 6 months in New York after moving here, I realized it was like that all the time. I think I stayed home one night in the first six or 8 months I'd lived here. Right. Because there were like 5 or 6 things happening tonight. You'd go to Tramps and go see fucking Tribe with D'Angelo, and you're just like, oh my god, this is incredible, right? What was the other place? Wetlands. Like, Koflo was playing at Wetlands with MF Doom and whatever, and you're like, oh my god, this is incredible. And I just call someone, get on the list, and I'm in, and it was great. And then 9 months into that CD Now job, I got called by 360 Hip Hop, by Selwyn and Chris X, and they're like, we're doing this hip hop website, and it's Russell Simmons, and it's going to be incredible. We're putting the All-Star team together, and they made me an offer for a salary that was beyond my wildest dreams. Wow. And I was like a 6-figure salary and a year into my time in New York, less than a year. And I was like, this is incredible. Yeah. And that was fun. And then the bubble burst, right? Like when I was the culture editor for 360 Hip Hop, and we had a lot of money to burn through, like every .com then. And I remember I hired Sasha Farah Jones to write stuff for me. I did a photo blog with Ricky Powell. I had Egon write for me. Wow. I had great writer. And like, he was just a kid in college at the time, right? And I was paying him $1 a word, and he was like, this is incredible. I can't believe, because I just have this money to blow through, right? And I didn't realize it was a bubble and it was all going to burst, but it was a bubble and it all burst. Right. So after that, and then 9/11 happened. I was freelancing still, and
were you in New York when 9/11 happened?
Yeah, I was in New York because I had moved in '99, so I was living here, and I was living in Chelsea. And and 9/11, actually, it's funny because I remember I was writing a review of Ghostface Supreme Clientele for Vibe, and it was due the Monday, the 10th. And I was late, of course. And then 9/11 happened. And I remember getting a call on 9/11 from my editor, whose name I won't say because it was really... And she was like, I still need your review. Oh my God. And I was like, I know I'm late, and I know I owe it to you, but I can't work on it today because the world is burning.
Yes. What the fuck?
And she's like, we're still here and we're closing the magazine. I need your review. It was supposed to be, I think, the lead review for that issue. Holy smokes. And I remember hanging up on her and just being like, I can't get it to you today. And I think then the magnitude of what happened sank in over there. Yeah. Jesus Christ. I mean, I don't blame her. She was under pressure and she was young and I get it. And I was late. Like real talk, I was late. Right. I was fucking them up. And I ended up doing the review that week and turning it in before the end of the week. And really, I kind of phoned it in. Like, it just, it wasn't It was just to get it done, right?
Yeah, I understand.
And then post 9/11, like really the industry kind of dried up. Like it was hard to find work, even being in New York. And what I realized is that I just was hard. And then so it's a funny story. John Carmonica. So when I met John Carmonica in '99, my first week in New York, he told me that he got into music writing because of me. He had read something I had written. I think it was a Razcast piece in Bomb or something, and he's like, I want to do this. Mm-hmm. And I tell him that I got out of music writing because of him. Because as I was getting frustrated with the freelance life and not being able to write well, what I realized is I was looking at people like John, like Khalifa, Sasha Fairjones, Hua, Dave Tompkins, and I was like, I'll never be that good. Like, they're really good at it, and I will never be that good as a writer. I love talking to artists. I love storytelling. I love the storylines in music, and I love, knowing the history, knowing releases, but I love the culture, but I will never be that good as a writer. I don't love it enough. It's hard for me. It's tedious. It's a slog, and I don't love it. And I was really getting frustrated by that. And what I decided was I have to leave writing. Like, I can't do this.
Wow. Okay.
Because I will never be as good as John. Like that. So that's the funny thing that John and I share. He says he got into it because of me, and I say I got out of it because of him. And then, so what I realized is a couple years later, like, I was in debt and not getting work and, not happy with writing, but it was the only thing I knew how to do. And I had never worked at a place where I could develop skills and follow a track. Like, I wasn't able to get jobs at magazines as, editors or writers or whatever.
Right.
I was just in a really frustrating place. And so I decided I just need to get somewhere where I can just find a path and figure out something new. And fortunately, I got hit up by Ocean McAdams at MTV in 2003. And he's like, hey, we're hiring for a staff writer here at MTV News, and we're trying some people out for a few days at a time. Like, are you interested? And I'm like, yes. And a few years earlier, he had asked me, he knew my byline, he had asked me to try out for a hip-hop hosting gig.
Oh, yeah?
Which I did, just because that's what you do.
Right,
I just moved to New York. I'm like, this is cool.
Yeah.
And it ultimately went to Sway, and I was like, how on earth did you ever think I could be?
So you were up for that same gig?
Yeah, they brought in all these hip hop writers to do camera tests. And I remember my camera test was awful. I remember I did a shot of bourbon at a bar down the street before I went in to do the tryout, and then they gave that job to Sway, and I was like, I remember when I was at MTV years later, I laughed at Ocean. I was like, how would you ever think that I could do what Sway does? Like, he's incredible at it.
Right.
But so he asked me to come in to try out for the staff writer job. I think Minya O was there as a staff writer who had just left, and they were trying to fill that position. And what they were doing is they were having people come in for 1 or 2 days and just pitch stories and write stories for online, MTV News Online, and for on air. And they would, going to try a bunch of people out. So I went in for a day. Then they asked me back the next week for 2 days. And then they asked me back the following week. And then they're like, can you stay for a week? And then can you do it for a month? And
slowly built up?
Yeah. And it was like, what I realized is I found out I was really good at news writing. Like, I knew how to turn a story. Like, I knew that, especially for hip hop, like, I knew that a release date, when an album has a release date, that's a news story that people want to know. And all I would do is I'd call the label and say, do you have a release date for this album? And they'd tell me, and then I'd flip it into a story. And so every morning there was a 9:30 a.m. news meeting, and I'd pitch 5 or 6 things, and they liked all my ideas, and I'd write them up, and they'd get good numbers. And so then at some point at the end of my first trial month, I think it was like August 2003 or 2004, I forget, but I was like, so the month's up. And they're like, oh, no, you got the job. Like, you're good. So okay. I was at MTV, and there's a couple people who were really trying to discourage me from taking that job. They're like, MTV's garbage. Right. Like you're not going to ever be able to do anything real there.
Right.
And I was just like, you know what? Like, you might be right, but like, I need a job, and
there comes a point, right?
Yeah, and I just need to try something new. And this job was mostly TV writing, like translating online stories for TV reads.
Okay.
And so that was something new for me, and it was a challenge that I got to tackle.
What, that would then run on a teleprompter? Or something
that Kurt Loder would read, and John Norris would read, and Gideon Yago and Sujin Pak and Sway would read.
That's
right?
Cool.
It was cool, and it was a different type of writing because you're writing to show.
Right.
And not writing to write, right? You're not
Yeah.
writing just for language. You're writing to show. You're writing around clips. And so my job at MTV News for my first 6 months as a staff news writer was reporting and stories that were actual news for online, and then taking those stories and writing them for TV reads. And I was good at it. I was really
So
good.
flipping two stories out of one, basically, right?
Yeah, one for different mediums, right?
Yeah.
And so, and
it's a great test.
And writing
too.
for TV, you're writing around interview bites, and you're writing around B-roll, and like that was new to me. And I realized I really liked it, and I was also really good at it. And I was like, okay, this is the opportunity I was looking for. This is a way to be at a place, get paid a salary, have some stability and security, but also it's thrilling. It's a different environment. It's a new skill I can learn while I'm here.
Right.
And so the biggest decision I made in my career was taking the job at MTV and not thinking that I knew more about music than they did. Which is something that the younger me would have definitely done.
Right.
But I said, you know what? I'm going to just submit to this place and learn about it, and then figure out my path here.
Yeah.
And so for the first 6 months at MTV, I took everything they threw at me. Whatever garbage, junket, whatever. Britney Spears is releasing a perfume at Macy's. There's a red carpet. Can you do the interviews on the red carpet with fans? I was like, yes. Diddy is doing some, spectacle and whatever for some, whatever event. Can you work the red carpet? Yes. We need to do a promo for this, stupid movie, whatever that's coming out. Can you do the interviews and write a story for it? I'm like, yes. Like I did everything they threw at me. One, it taught me about the institution. 2, it gave me a lot of practice and a lot of reps writing for television, writing for hosts.
Right.
3, it gave me exposure into working in television and working with video and clips. Yep. So I would do interviews with every artist that came in there, and doing an interview even though you're off camera, but doing an interview with an artist for television is different than doing it for a magazine.
Sure.
In a magazine, you could put a recorder on and just sit around a table and talk and have a conversation, and I was really good at that.
Yeah.
But for TV, you have to give space. You have to set up questions. They need to explain it for an audience that may not know what the question was, right? You need they have to incorporate the question in the answer, but in a way that doesn't sound stupid. And I started to really learn a new skill set. And what I realized is I was like, oh, this is cool. And then again, with the Roots, like I pitched a story for that. I wanted to be a video story, which was the Roots are recording a new album. They've got this new studio in Philly that they've turned into a club, and it's a strip club and a nightclub, and they just have different people coming in every night to jam, and that's how they're recording their new album. And I obviously knew Questlove, and I'd written a lot about the Roots, and Rich Nichols had invited me down there, and he's like, "You want to come hang out?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "But I really want to do a story for MTV about this." So I pitched the story, and they're like, "This is great. Go down there with a shooter, producer, and do your interviews and make this video package." It was my first video package. So I went down there and we shot it, and it was like the Roots gave me great bites, and there was strippers from the strip clubs that were there after hours, and like people like Erica and Erykah Badu and Common, and like Jill Scott and different people like in the studio coming in and out. This, the Roots always have a younger group of musicians that they bring in to work with them on stuff, to like mentor them, and like so it was like a studio full of like 40 musicians playing, and
wow,
and it was incredible. We shot this piece, and then I took the footage back and I constructed a script for a video package my first time. And so I had done the pitch, I did the interviews, I scripted out this piece with video clips and a voiceover. It was the first time doing that. It goes on air, we edit it, I'm in the edit, it goes on air, and the info screen that comes on before the package says the Roots recording new album, producer, and it was the producer shooter that I had gone with. His name was on it. My name was not on it.
Oh,
and shit. I said, wait, why are you listed as producer but I'm not listed? He's like, well, I'm the producer and you were the writer. And I was like, no, but I did everything. He's like, well, then that's producing. And I was like, oh. So I was like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to be a producer.
Right.
Because I directed you to shoot what I wanted to, but I did everything else.
Right. Which is being a producer. That's what he told me. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So
6 months into my time at MTV, I did that root story. I went to my bosses the next day and I said, I want to take a crack at producing. And they're like, okay, find a story to produce. We'll let you produce it. We'll give you a senior producer to sort of be your training wheels.
Okay.
You have to do it in addition to your daily duties, but take a crack at it.
Right.
So I found a story, pitched it to them, produced it from beginning to end. It was on the Brooklyn High School marching band called the Brooklyn Steppers.
Okay.
That the band leader was, they did hip hop songs, like
covers, basically, right?
Band covers of
Right.
hip hop songs, and that was really interesting to a lot of the kids that were in the band.
Mm-hmm.
But to be in the band and to do that and have fun and travel with them, you had to maintain a B+ average.
Okay.
And so the kids there they would have homework time and tutoring time, and then they'd practice.
So there's your story, right?
That was my story.
Right.
So I did that, and it looked. I started getting into directing. I'm like, we're going to shoot this band playing this riff, and we're going to shoot it from 2 different angles. And I was
Right.
like directing, and
Nice.
And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is it. It's storytelling that I loved about when I was doing rap journalism for
Right.
magazines. But it's a different way of telling the story that is new to me, and it was thrilling. And so I pitched that. It did really well, and then I just was doing that at MTV. I was pitching video stories. And then so 6 months after that story ran, I pitched a series of video stories on Houston's hip-hop scene
Okay.
that
Nice.
was starting to bubble up. And the
Right.
reason why I pitched it is because I loved all the stuff out of Houston, UGK, Mike Jones at the time, and all
Right.
the Swisher House stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, DJ Screw and Chopped and Screwed. I love that stuff. But I'd heard Still Tippin' on a radio station in Atlanta. And then when I went to the Bay for the holidays, I heard it in the Bay, and I said, "Oh, this song is going to break."
Yeah.
And this is the song that'll put the Houston scene, Long Underground, Lil Flip, and all that stuff, which has always been
Yep.
regional and underground.
Right.
This is going to put that scene on the map. So I went to MTV, and because I had done 6 months to a year of just bullshit work, they trusted me, and they knew I knew how to tell a story in their style. And I pitched this thing to them. They said yes. We went to Houston. And I did a series of stories that was going to run one a day for a week. Sway hosted. At that point, I was really producing him a lot,
Right.
and we did these stories, and I started to get creative. I was like, Sway, I want you to do a stand up, but since we're in Houston, we should shoot the stand up at the Houston Rockets practice, and with Yao Ming in the background, and that was different for MTV.
And you had access like that because of MTV, right? You could get in there.
I called the Rockets, and I'm like, hey, we're doing a thing on Houston Hip Hop, but I want to shoot the stand-up at the Rockets Arena. And they're
Nice.
like, yeah, great, come by.
Dope.
And so we did 5 stories. We did one on UGK. We did one on Mike Jones. We did one on DJ Screw. We did one on I forget what else. But
Scarface?
it wasn't Scarface. It was Scarface and Rap-A-Lot.
Okay, cool.
And we did 5 video stories, and they ran one a day for Houston Hip Hop Week. And then my boss was like, "We should comp this together into a half-hour show." And I was like, "Yeah,
Like a special.
like a Houston hip hop special." So he's like, "I'll give you a little extra money to spend some time in the edit and comp this together into a show." So we did. We called it My Block off the Scarface song,
Right.
and we put it out, and it did really, really well.
I remember that.
Yeah.
What year is this?
This was 2005.
Nice. So you made that.
So I made that, and I made that
That's
a
what's
year
up.
into my time at MTV, and it did really good numbers
Right.
for a half-hour show on MTV and MTV2, because every time it repeated, it got the same numbers.
Not bad.
And that was really important to them at the time. It wasn't like when every time it aired, it got big numbers. It's so that every time they played it, it got the same number.
Yeah.
So they knew that 500,000 to 1 million people were watching that show every time they replayed it. And so that was a success.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're like, my boss was like, let's make this a series. And I'm like, yes, the next one we're going to do should be Memphis. We should do it on 3-6 Mafia, and we should do it, like, I want to do Memphis.
Yeah.
And so My Block became a series, and that became how, like, that year at MTV was my transition out of music journalism magazines into storytelling for television. And I stayed at MTV. We did 8 episodes of My Block. I got really good at it because I understood.
Did you go back to the Bay?
Yeah, so we did an episode of the Bay, which
Dope.
was like an incredible homecoming for me.
I
Like
bet.
it was cool to come back to the Bay as like a TV producer to
man.
shine a light on a scene that I grew up in.
No question.
And getting a lot of love, right? And the thing I loved about my block and what I was able to do at MTV, that because I had spent that time learning about their institution and building the trust, my skill at MTV was being able to tell really underground stories to a mainstream audience that didn't offend the people on the ground and still made sense to the people who didn't know about it.
Nice.
So
it's an art right there.
Yeah,
right?
I mean that was the skill I developed at MTV that I thought I was really good at and think I'm still good at, and has allowed me to have a career as a storyteller for video content, right? As a director and producer for video. Is at MTV I was able to tell the story of DJ Screw and Michael Watts and what Chopped and Screwed meant without offending anyone on the ground, giving them their just due and telling the story correctly. Maybe not as deep as they wanted it, but being able to say that same story, it makes sense to someone who doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so my block was fun for me because the A segment would always be the biggest thing out of that city. The B segment would always be something a little bit more cultural, like language or cars or something like that.
Okay.
The C segment was always me introducing someone new from that scene, or who maybe was underground. And then the D segment was always like the crazy like performance segment.
Oh, cool.
And so
and the show would end on that, right?
It would always end on something smaller because it was the shortest segment of the show,
right.
but cooler, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like full of flavor.
Right.
So like in Memphis we did 3-6 Mafia, but we had to tie it into the movie Hustle and Flow.
Okay.
So but
sense.
We did like Lil White and we did like Frasier Boy, and I would also get people to do cameos, right? So like when we did for Memphis, we got what's his name? What was the producer's name? Jazzy Faye. Jazzy Faye's father was one of the people in Otis Redding's band who survived. Who he was the guy who didn't go on the plane that killed Otis Redding.
Wow.
They flipped for seats on the plane. He lost the coin toss.
Wow.
And that plane went down and killed that Otis Redding and his band, except for 2 members. He was one of the 2 members.
Wow, and that's Jazzy
Faye's father. So we did an interview, since Jazzy Faye was like big producer at the time.
Sure.
We did an interview with him and his father at the Stax Museum.
Dope.
And so that was my way of being able to get like the real shit into like a big show, right?
Yeah.
When we did the Bay episode, like we rode around in a convertible with Too Short, and literally people are like ghostwriting the whip, like for real in the streets of Oakland, and we're getting that on camera.
Dope.
But it was also I put Lil B on camera. Nobody knew who the Pack was.
Wow!
And we brought
this is before that. What was their song about? Vans.
Yeah.
Right. And
Too Short was working. He's like, I got these kids I'm working with. I'm like, bring them down. And I had Lil B do the bumper to commercial with his stunner shades on,
It
was like,
it's so dope.
Yeah, and it was cool. So I had a lot of fun with that show. But that was the thing. I worked there at MTV doing that until 2009. The last thing I did there was I was the lead producer for the 2008 election.
Wow.
And that was like a dream of mine. I had grown up watching Choose or Lose on MTV.
Of course.
And now I was the senior producer leading the coverage for the 2008 election, which was historic on so many different levels.
Yes.
It's how I met my wife. We were the only 2 people in the building that were for Obama and not Hillary.
Wow.
Only 2 people on the floor. So like when Obama was my guy when he announced, and everyone else on the floor was for Hillary, my wife was the only other person who was down for Obama early on. And that's how we met, became friends, and then ultimately started dating and got married.
That's incredible.
But once I finished the Choose or Lose stuff at MTV, I realized, and the inauguration, I realized I was done there. I had learned everything I could learn there.
So wait, you met? So you obviously met and worked with Obama a little bit during this.
I did twice. Yeah.
Wow.
We did these forums in New Hampshire and Iowa with the candidates.
Yeah.
And
similar to the original Choose Your, like when they did like Bill Clinton.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd grown up watching that. So to be
who was that with Tabitha Soren?
Tabitha Soren and Kurt Loder. Yeah.
Right.
So 2008, we were in 2007, 2008. We did those with John Edwards, Hillary Clinton, Obama, John McCain. There were town hall meetings. I was producing and directing them. When we did the Obama one, I got to meet him, and I got my picture taken with him, which was great.
That's so dope.
I had a cigarette with him.
What?
I couldn't even say that. Actually, I had a cigarette with him, which was
that's
crazy.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it was cool. And yeah, so when the inauguration happened, I realized my time at MTV was done, and I ended up. But by that point, I had spent 6 years there and turned from a writer into a director and producer, and that was it. That was my career transition.
So where did you jump from there? You did Vice?
So from there, I went to Vice.
So obviously, Vice at that time was in a transitional phase too, right? Or about to be.
Yeah, Vice was the Vice guys. So I had been writing for Vice since '96.
Okay, so since it was even being made in Montreal,
yeah,
right.
when it was a broadsheet in Montreal, and
which had some hilarious journalism then.
Yeah, it was, Vice was a vibe at the time, right? Like I didn't agree with all their they scrubbed all the archives now, but back then they were headlines with the N word and the F word, and they didn't they didn't really care.
Fritz the Cat also.
Fritz the Cat, yeah. Fritz the Cat, man, he was a character.
He was In Search of Divine Styler.
Search of Divine Styler was legendary. Wow, legendary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Vice was always in the MTV building because they had signed a deal to have MTV fund their video venture, VBS. And,
yes, okay.
And about a year and a half, 2 years, I think it was 2007, they started being in the building a lot. They had asked me to work for them. Swoosh is one of the founders, was one of my best friends.
Oh, okay.
Since I met him in '96 and started writing for Vice, we were both brown dudes in this industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he and I were DJing under the name Indo Pack Attack, which was kind of funny. But they had asked me to join them because they were looking for video producers, but I said no to them initially because I wasn't ready yet. I hadn't learned everything I needed to learn, and I wanted to stay at MTV. I was doing my blog, I was doing other shows the premier interview shows on MTV, half hours with Jay-Z, half hours with Justin Timberlake. I was producing those.
Yeah,
and
those are big.
And those were big, and those were cool, and I wasn't done learning yet, right? So I turned them down, but as soon as I realized that after the election in 2008, I was like, I'd done everything I could do at MTV. I felt I was successfully had made this transition from writer into video producer and director. Mm-hmm. I said, I'm ready. And so I hit them up, and they're like, yeah, we would love you to come on board and help us get from where we are now to the next level. And I said, yeah, TV. And they're like, you know how to do TV. That's where we want to go. So I took that job in 2009, and I worked at Vice for 4 years. That got me out of music a little bit.
Yeah.
But in Vice, working at Vice is when I realized how much I did know. I really did know my way around as a video producer and director. I wasn't safe. I wasn't in the safe space of music anymore.
Sure, I get it.
We were traveling around the world and doing all sorts of wild stories, and I realized I wanted to get Vice off their white guys on safari vibe and do more more from the ground sort of perspective.
What are some of the far-flung places that you went?
So I produced a lot for Shane, and then one of the first things I did at Vice, I was like, if you want to get on TV, I know how to produce MTV style. Let's do a show for MTV. And we pitched a show called Vice Guide to Everything that would take these 60-minute esoteric docs that Vice was doing and instead create 5 to 7 minute segments.
Cool.
And comp them together into a TV show. So for that show, we went to Jordan, Lebanon, Cairo, Yemen. I went to Yemen with Spike Jonze and Shane, and we got detained by national security.
What's Yemen like outside once you got out of that?
That's a whole other story.
Is it?
It's my one war story.
Okay.
We got detained by national security and had to bribe our way out of the country with CIA help.
Wow.
That was a real that's my one war story. But more than that, Vice, I got to fly all over the world, Tokyo and the slums of Rio to interview, favela warlords, and it was cool.
Yeah.
Vice was the most fun I ever had, but it was also the worst job on me. I quit after 4 years because it just wasn't a healthy place to work.
Sure.
And
I get it.
I'll say it, I didn't like working for those guys anymore. They weren't good people.
Right.
And I produced the pilot for the HBO series. Okay. That we sold to HBO, that people know as Vice on HBO.
Yeah.
And I walked away from that. And I walked away from an Emmy award, a certain Emmy that it was going to get. And I walked away from a role at the TV channel I knew they were going to have. And I walked away from all that because I just couldn't stand working there anymore.
Wow.
It was a very, very unhealthy, toxic environment.
Right. Good for you, though.
Yeah. It was...
I know
it's hard.
Yeah, I don't doubt that whatsoever.
It was hard.
And I know that there's obviously a bigger story there. But... and sure, especially after working your way up all those years to not a lot of people can finally get a big payout or a nice trophy for all the shit that they've done.
Yeah.
It's no easy task, especially if you come from a world of freelancing all the way up to that shit. trust me, very few people. I mean, I don't even have to say that, but they don't get to that point. But so to be able to walk away, I mean, it takes, guts.
Yeah, I mean,
And,
yeah, I mean,
integrity.
I think the hardest thing, like, I bopped around a couple of jobs since then. Like, I left. I took a job at MySpace when they were trying to resurrect themselves. Mm-hmm. I took that job mainly as a way to get out of Vice. Like, I took it because it was 3 times the salary I was making at Vice, who had never given me a raise in 4 years, or even though I was head of production. Like, it's hard reading about how the company's worth $1 billion in the paper and they won't give you a raise. Like, they were shitty then. Yeah, they're still kind of shitty now if you read the papers, right? Right. And I'm not afraid to say that. Like I loved my time there, but they were shitty people to work for, and I left and walked away from because I couldn't be a part of that club anymore. I didn't want to be. I took this job at MySpace. I spent a year there, and what I learned there is that I could be an executive. I didn't have to be in the field to still feel fulfilled. Right. And even though that it was a certain disaster, right? But I was like, look, if it's a long shot, if it works, then you're a legend. If it doesn't work, I got out of debt. I was able to save some money. I was able to hire a team of people and learn how to be an executive.
Did you pull Justin Timberlake in? Wasn't he like the spokesman?
It was his creative team that brought me on board.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and he wasn't heavily involved. His creative team was, and they were cool, but it blew up after a year and a few months. Right. And I took some time off from there. I got married, and I ended up taking a job at the Fader to run content and creative for the Fader. Did 3 years there, and took a job, a year ago left Fader to work at Vivo. And, I think to your point earlier, like, I've managed to find a career out of this. Yeah. I don't know. I'm the kind of person, like, I know other people who my skill set has always been a little bit of everything. Like,
yes, clearly.
I know a little bit of everything, and I know how to put things together. Right. And I'm great at collaborations, but great at putting things together. I'm great at taking an idea and making it better. Right. But I'm not good at working on my own. And so, yes, I've been able to make a career out of this, and I earn good money in a way that other people maybe don't. Right. Sure. I was able to transition to video in 2004. Yeah. Before pivot to video became a thing in 2017.
No doubt.
And I was able to get out of the rap journalism freelance racket before other people, found out it was not going to be, a way to earn a living anymore. Yeah. And I'm happy about that. I've been able to make some stuff visually that I'm really proud of. I have a really good visual portfolio of stuff I've directed and stuff I've produced. And I'm really, really proud of that.
Yeah, because the Vivo stuff too, I've been kind of peeping that a little bit too. That's an updated version of something that you've already been working on.
Yeah, right? And it's like, and so I think even Vivo, I took that mainly just because it's a job, and I got to put a team together and have money to spend and make stuff.
That's incredible.
Like, that's it for me right now. It's like, I just want to be able to make stuff that's cool. Yeah. The thing I'm missing that really started when I left Vice is, I've invested a lot of time and energy and experience in this culture, and it's finally coming to fruition on a very mainstream, big level, big scale. Right. And I'm not in a place where I can take advantage of that. Like, I did stuff on Kanye as he was coming up at MTV, because he was always in the building. Like, he was dating a couple people in the building, so he was always there. And, I was at a Grace Jones show once, and I feel a tap on my shoulder, and it's Kanye. And he's like, hey, what's up? Like, wow. We did the first half-hour interview. We did a half-hour interview show with Kanye called All Eyes on Kanye West.
Were you off camera?
I was producing the thing, so I was
directing. Were you the one?
No, Sway was the interviewer, and I was directing it. Right, so we shot it in the studio. His mother was there. We had his artwork in the room that he had worked on when he was in high school and college. Wow. And it was his first in-depth interview for MTV. Prepped Sway for the questions. We went over like what we wanted to talk about, what we wanted to get. I put it together in the edit, and it went out, and it was like, that's what I was good at. Yeah. But I wasn't able to stay at Vice long enough to be able to see through ideas on a big scale, because I had moved to another job, and then I was not at that job long enough to see things on a big scale. Right. So the one thing that's missing from my career now that I'm finding a way to get back to is being able to do things that take advantage of my time, relationship, and knowledge of the culture, and do them on a big scale where they deserve to be now. Right. I don't know what form that takes. I don't know what it looks like. It might be a movie. It might be a script. It might be a doc. It might be a doc series. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of where my head is at right now. Is like, how do the stuff that we love, that we we want to hear those stories. Like, how do I get that out into the world? And that's sort of the thing I'm looking for now.
Yeah, obviously we're having this conversation New Year's Eve. Too,
yes.
Which is interesting.
Point of reflection.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I love doing these conversations too, because it really taps. I'd like to hear what is going on, especially with writers, like where their head is at too. Because there's something very relatable to everything that you're saying. That I mean, and there is something about kind of consistently starting over. It's a part of that music hustle too, because nothing lasts forever. The same way that these magazines that I pulled out of the stacks, they're all from another era. And that medium is no longer, the same way MTV is not what it was when you were working. MySpace, of course, long gone. And who's to say that what the future of Vice even holds, that might just self-destruct in a way too. So
I mean, it's weird. A lot of the writing, I think, that I've done, that you've done, that other people have done, it's like you can't find it online.
No.
All that 90s stuff is not available online.
No, I know. That's why I hold on to these things, too, because I love reading them, because it's a very different style of journalism.
Different style of journalism.
The tone, the tempo.
Yeah. I mean, look, right now, maybe one of the only magazines that really covers the culture in a very sort of broad way, genreless, we're all connected, is Fader.
Yeah. Definitely.
Complex to some degree, but Complex is very male and very sort of like hype-beasty. But
no doubt.
Fader, Fader covers the culture. I enjoyed being there and working with a great group of people that, on the editorial team and video team that got that. But the 90s was filled with magazines, like 10 magazines like that.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, not only magazines in the States, but also in the UK. And like, there's a certain, there's a certain thing about reading old issues, looking at old issues of Bomb Hip Hop magazine, and Herb especially, where you're just like, wow, like, to be young and in the mix and to see your culture and see this world that you're invested in and live in represented like this, like in a, written by the people that are inside the culture, like that was a thrilling thing.
Yes.
And there was no template to follow. Like you were making your own way and making your own space.
Yeah.
On figuring it out as you went along, and that was really exciting.
What I think is pretty amazing too, because I'm a first generation kid too. So my parents came from Hungary in '69 basically. And that I know that there's something I can deeply relate to your experience in that coming from parents that as a first generation kid that came to the U.S. and knowing that there's a lot of other writers like that, that they sort of were born into this American culture of the the 70s and 80s and sort of made their own life. Their parents not really understanding what they're doing, and that like creating a industry out of scratch almost, or by their own sort of mental willpower and like the work ethic that I think gets instilled in like first generation kids too. I think it's dope. I mean, I think that what you've done and where you've gone with it too is a pretty unique kind of trajectory. Because some guys, because you haven't read a book, written a book or anything, right?
No, I don't have the patience for it.
Right.
I don't think I have the talent or the patience for it. I've contributed to people's books, like I've written a couple things for Oliver's classic material.
Yeah,
I think one of my favorite things I've ever written in my life. In fact, I read it recently again, and I was like, I can't believe I wrote this. This is really good. I can't believe I wrote this. I could never do this again. Was an essay I wrote for this book of on Fela that Trevor Schoonmaker had put out a few years ago.
Oh yeah, I haven't read that.
I wrote an essay on there that sort of linked, the Fela sound in contemporary music at the time, and it was maybe the best thing I ever wrote. Like, it was really fulfilling, very very well informed, and it was well edited. So but yeah, like I've just tried to find a space where I can fit in, but yeah, nothing will ever be like the 90s. Like everybody, their favorite time, their favorite period of music is when they came of age.
Yeah.
And for people like us, it was the 90s, and so those are the things I will always remember fondly and will never be replicated. And so some kid today, like Lil Pump, is like where they're coming of age, and that's going to mean everything to them in 10 to 15 years.
Absolutely, and I get that.
But I think the thing is that I don't culture in general, not just hip hop culture. It's a living, breathing thing, and it's always changing, and it's exciting. It's exciting that I can access, DJ mixes from around the world in a la carte in a moment's notice.
Right.
It's thrilling, that some kid in his bedroom can change music.
Yeah.
You have to sift through a lot of garbage to get there, but I still think the one thing that holds true now that still holds true, and I think kids are smarter now than they've ever been, but we did this pre-internet, a lot of it. The fact that we did it at all is amazing if you think about that.
Yeah, a lot of cold calls.
A lot of cold calls.
Faxing and meeting and driving and all that
and
stuff.
Spending time with people and seeing magazine on their coffee table, and you're like, what is that?
Yeah.
Think about the fact that you have a copy of the Bomb Hip Hop magazine here in a Brooklyn brownstone, like that's crazy to me 25 years later. Like that's cool.
Yeah.
And I remember going to LA and we would hang out at Brian B Plus's place, and he'd have the most amazing records and magazines that I'd never seen before, and then I'd go to Davis and get turned on to that and cold call someone. And I wrote a column for Straight No Chaser out of Brooklyn, which was like a jazz magazine.
Yeah, man.
And I wrote like a beats column for them or a hip hop column for them. It's like, it's crazy. Like pre-internet, I was, writing a column and reading it over the phone or faxing it over, and someone would transcribe it on the other end, and then 6 weeks after the magazine came out in London, I'd get a package in the mail with a copy of the magazine, and it was like, wow, this is crazy. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just for me, I love music, I love storytelling, I love people, and that whatever form that takes, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I still, to this day, can't believe I'm able to earn a living and get paid for some of this stuff. It really is. I tell my team at Vivo, a really great group of kids, I tell them that all the time, never take for granted that you're getting paid to just be creative all day.
Yeah.
And make shit. That's cool.
Yeah. It took a while to get to be able to actually make real money doing that too.
Yeah, but we persisted through it because we loved it, right?
Yeah.
That's it. That's really it.
Well, before we totally wrap, you made mention of these bios and stuff, which I was super intrigued by. So besides you did Midnight Marauders and Slum Village's debut. Is there anything else that springs to mind?
I wrote bios just because as a freelancer. And every freelancer does this, even still today, even though they don't do as many bios.
Right.
Writing bios was a very easy way to make money.
Yeah.
Because labels paid, and they paid well.
Yeah.
You got the music before anybody else. You did a quick interview that was just basically by the numbers kind of interview.
Sure.
What are the songs? What do you make it? What was the vibe? Right. And the artist would answer those questions, and it took an hour to write.
Yeah.
And you'd get paid on time.
Yeah.
And so that was the bio racket. But for me, like I said earlier, it was also a way to get the music before even the writers got the music.
Yeah, man.
Before the editors got the music. And so that was cool. I did that with Tribe. I did that with a lot of people. I really forget. But the one that does stand out is I did it for the first NERD album.
Really?
For In Search Of. And what I love the Neptunes. I got the demo, which I still have, because it also has a song that never came out. And you can't even find it on the internet right now. It's crazy. I got the demo. They had trouble shopping that album. They were shopping it for 2 years.
Oh wow!
No one would pick it up because it was so unselfconsciously not like the Neptunes.
Right.
It was just this different vibe. It's still my favorite NERD album.
Me too, by far, man. And the original version, not
the original
the
version, not the replayed one.
Of course,
the original version with the beats, because it was rock music through programmed beats.
Right.
And it was an attitude and a narrative that was so unselfconscious. And then once they became conscious of it, the music went in a different place.
True.
Like the second album on, even this new album, it's cool, but it'll never be the genuine sort of thing that the first album was. Nobody was making that music then.
No, it was remarkable, really, to listen to it.
It was, and the character and just the world they created, right?
Yeah, man. Wow, so you wrote that one.
So I interviewed them, and I remember falling in love with it, and really just there's nothing I could write that could do this album justice. So I did the whole trick that sometimes writers do is I basically took some of what Pharrell had said and Chad had said in the interview, and I wrote from their perspective a manifesto of what NERD means and is. I wrote it from Pharrell's voice. and they loved it so much that they made it the liner notes to the first album.
No way.
And it's still, I think I don't know if it actually ended up being in the liner notes, but I think it did. But if you look at if you Google NERD bio, or who NERD is, or In Search Of is,
right.
I think that thing that I wrote is still there.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
That's like being a part of that project, you know? It's
I mean, I wrote the bios for the first 3 albums.
Really?
And on the second album, I remember I got a call from Pharrell's publicist, and she's like, Pharrell only wants you to write this.
Dope,
and then the third album, same thing. Pharrell only wants you to write this. And Pharrell described me to somebody once when I'd run into some party or in a room, and he described me to somebody as one of the few people in the world who get it.
Nice.
And I was just like, wow, what a fucking compliment.
Yeah.
Like, Questlove paid me a similar compliment once, and I was like, I'm a little fanboy. Like, that's an amazing thing to hear from somebody.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I don't write bios anymore. I haven't written a period in a very long time. But like for a while, bios is a way to pay the rent, and also just to stunt on your fellow writers. Like, I got this shit before you did. Like,
and that's part of the game.
That was part of the game.
Your hustle is on point, though. I mean, it's on a whole nother level than where it started, which is it's dope, man.
And it was fun. When I was when I was writing bios, getting the music before writers, and then playing it on the radio. That was like a full flex.
Yeah.
Like I realized it a little bit at the time, but like that was a full flex. And that's just a different era. That shit doesn't happen anymore, right? Like,
nah, but it's dope. Yeah, I mean, I love it, man. And I just, I appreciate you taking all this time to talk to me.
Oh, man, I appreciate you asking. I hope it wasn't boring for anybody listening.
No. It was fascinating, man. Thanks so much, and have a great New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Yo, that was amazing. Thank you so much to Joseph Patel and all of y'all for tuning in to our very first episode of 2018, only here on the House List. My name is Peter Agas. I'm the host. Every episode is edited by CJ. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell a friend to check it out as well. I know there's a lot of different options for podcasts out there. And I know in my intro, I said a few words about some artists and people who had passed, but I couldn't let this particular episode go by without sending my regards to the family and friends of Combat Jack. Of course, a pioneer in hip-hop oriented podcasts, an incredible legend in the music industry with a storied career, and also a great host and visionary for the medium. So I'm a fan. I was a fan from the beginning. I was a fan of his website when he was writing, too. So I feel like I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for Combat Jack. And I'm sure that many, many fans of podcasts like this would agree with that, too. So thank you guys again so much for tuning in. And I'll be back before you know it with a brand new episode of the Houseless Podcast. Peace, y'all. Be well and have a great New Year.